Just while Francisco finds the slides, I found this. I've been packing up my office recently, and I found this manual. It's a manual for working with people with HIV and AIDS for occupational therapists, and it's written in 1992, 1993. It's a really interesting historical resource. There's 5 pages on how we treat medically how we treat HIV. It's a page on AZT. There's a page on a brand new drug called DDI. There's 2 pages on complementary therapies, and there's 3 pages on palliative care. And then the rest of the book is pretty much a handbook on grief and loss and death and dying and bereavement. So I think it's a 15th anniversary of Quigger. Looking at it's a really interesting thing to look back that this isn't that long ago. This is written by my predecessor from my last job. How much has changed and how much we're talking about today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of disabilities and some of the things that we've seen in the outpatient services that we run in the hospital trust where I work. Just going to give you a little bit of brief background about our services first. So I work for a newly merged trust consisting of 6 hospitals called Barts Health. We're the largest trust in the United Kingdom, so largest collection of health services, with a workforce of 15,000 and a turnover of £1.5 billion. So that's over 2 billion Canadian. We've got a catchment area of around about 2.5 million people in East London. And East London is traditionally an area with quite a mixed socioeconomic, but mostly lower socioeconomic areas, and high levels of immigration right back from hundreds of years to currently. Our new big spangly hospital, you can see there is the Royal London. It's an 18-storey flagship, and we're home to a major trauma centre, the helicopter emergency centre, a hyperacute stroke unit, and it's been very, very expensive. Our therapy services were redesigned a couple of years ago, and we now work in integrated occupational therapy and physiotherapy teams. We've got 7-day working. I got to work Christmas Day 2 years ago. It was fantastic, from 8 till 6. All sounds really wonderful, but actually we've heard a lot about the financial constraints today, and we've got this fantastic service on paper, this big spangly hospital, 5 inpatient therapy gyms with ceiling track hoists and all the equipment you could ask for, but no bums on seats to staff it. So this is Princess Anne opening one of our gyms earlier this year, where I was trying to drum up a little bit more interest in therapies, and I actually got her to meet a couple of outpatient ladies that I worked with living with HIV, a young lady who'd been positive since birth, who had really severe PML, who we're now trying to get to independent living, and another lady who we got back into work. We've got a 22-bed inpatient ward on the 13th floor, which has got a lovely view all over London, including the new Olympic Park, which is just down the road from us, which are all en suite apart from 2 bays, and we've got 10 negative pressure rooms. And I'm going to mostly now focus today on our outpatient unit, which is called the Graham Hayton unit. A little bit like Colm this morning, big, spangly, sparkly new hospital, but HIV and sexual health is round the corner, down the road, in a shitty little old Victorian place. This is our profile. So this is sort of what you probably would expect from a UK HIV population, where we've got a majority of people in whatever pejorative term you want to describe those ages as, depending on how old you feel yourself. But it is an ageing population. In terms of ethnicity and gender, 75 to 25 split male to female. But you'll see that our white UK or Irish-born population is less than 40%, and that actually sort of around about a third of our population describe themselves as Black African or Black other. Interestingly here, and we talked a little bit about this morning, that in terms of risk factors, around about a quarter of our population, their risk factor was abroad. That is, their actual HIV risk factor was before they came to the UK, and that is then associated with people with more advanced disease, more comorbidities, different subclades of HIV, which bring complexities in presentation. This is the staff that we've got at the moment, so we are really lucky in that we've got a big psychology staff, neuropsych, all sorts of different types of nursing and health advisors, and until recently, specialist OT, physio and dietetics, and they've got little asterisks next to them there, because these are the posts that are at the moment currently under threat and being cut. We heard a little bit this morning about the specialty clinics that we run. The two that I've been involved with, so you've heard this morning I have some input into the HIV neuro rehab clinic. We did trial also having input into our HIV and older people's clinic for a while, but interestingly, although we predicted there would be a role for us there, that actually the population that we had, and whether this was just coincidence for the pilot time that we had, we didn't really identify anyone where there was any needs. I was personally a little bit surprised by that. Our referrals for OT and physio come primarily from the clinic doctors, but also nursing staff, psychology, dietitians, social work. They must have an HIV-related complication, and you saw we've got 2,500, patients on our books, and of those, we are really only seeing the smallest end of the thinnest end of the wedge, the people with the largest number of comorbidities. We either assess them in the clinic or in our own rehab services, and we either see them there or refer them to our own group program. Obviously, with the changes, this is slightly under a redesign at the moment. This is a quick snapshot. I'm sorry the colours and prints may be a little bit small, but just a quick snapshot of my outpatient caseload as it is at the moment. And it was just really to give a flavour that actually there isn't really a pattern for the patients that we see. Other than that, for quite a few of them, you'll see that there's a number of different health problems they're presenting with, both central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, cancers, old things, new things, flare-up, musculoskeletal, so quite a range of things that we would see. In terms of then how we assess people, I started to write down all the assessments we used, and it was really long, so I've tried to pick out of a few things. But as an OT, I'm interested in how people really work and how people really live. So actually, functional assessment, assessing people in their ability to do whatever it is that they need to do in their life is the most important thing. And I'm going to just really briefly mention, because Francisco mentioned that an interest area of mine, there's a few of us trained in London and in my trust in an assessment called the Perceive, Recall, Plan, Perform assessment, which is an assessment of everyday functioning. And I'm going to do a little bit of a technical speak, but it's a criterion referenced assessment that employs task analysis. Basically, what you do is you take an everyday activity that's at an appropriate challenge level, you do it with a person, and there's a really complex way then that you assess what the areas of deficit are, what the areas of good performance are, and then that translates into looking at what an actual treatment plan is for someone. And that's something that we're hoping kind of at REVA level for our occupational therapists to start developing a bit more, because we think there's some really good legs in this particular assessment. And there is some papers out there on PRPP in HIV dementia. The sorts of things that we do some one-to-one sessions in the clinic or in the gym, whether that's advice or information where people go away with a home exercise program or a home fatigue management program, or whether it's actually hands-on practice of activities of daily living or hands-on actual treatment of people, splinting. But also a lot of what we do is signposting on people to appropriate services, so we're enabled to triage someone that's come through to us and find the correct community service for them. Between 2005 and 2011, we also ran our own rehab group, and that's Smart Group, and that's the last thing there in the box. And what I want to do now is just present some of the data from that group. Now, it isn't something we're running anymore, so it does seem a little bit odd, but when I went back through the data recently, because we did have a lot of people come through that program, and there were some interesting observations that we can make from the data that we got, and I just wanted to quickly sort of run you through some of that data. So basically, we set this group up in 2005 because we were seeing outpatients who needed some practice time. They needed to come, be with a qualified, under the supervision of a qualified therapist to work on specific goal-directed program in a way that wasn't available in another community service. So there was something specific about their HIV presentation that they wanted to work on that would improve their quality of life and the things that they wanted to do. There wasn't a program for them elsewhere, and actually we weren't able to say, here's a program, go away, come back in 4 weeks, and let's see how you're going. There are people that needed to come in and have the hands-on frequency, intensity. We also have, I think, something that's a little bit unique in HIV, where we have people who present with typically systemic and respiratory illness, so things that just make you a little bit knackered out. And you're working age, you've been in hospital, you've come out of hospital, you're not ready to go back to work or childcare or whatever it is that you would normally do, but you're not going to be eligible for community rehab program because by the time you've been eligible, they're probably not going to have picked you up in time. You've just really sat around for 4 or 6 weeks watching insert your own whatever terrible daytime TV you have here, Jeremy Kyle, or we have in the UK. And so these people could come back to us for a few weeks to just do some re-strengthening and then be able to go back to work quickly. And the other thing that we did do was we brought down our inpatients to this group because we ran it at the hospital, and that was surprisingly sort of powerful, because people with newly diagnosed or first catastrophic problem on the ward could come down and mix with people who'd been through the process themselves or who are living well, and actually there was some amazing peer support. But it also meant that people who were only being seen once or twice a week on the ward got another 2 sessions of arm's length therapy. The programs were individualised, and this is Emma, who is the physio that I was working with at the time and who helped start off all this process of this collaboration that we have with you guys. One of the reasons why it's a little bit hard to analyse the data is this wasn't a research project. This was a clinical service, and it evolved over time based on feedback from service users and the requirements of what we needed to be able to do with people, and just on our own knowledge and skills. For all the outpatients, we attempted to apply these sort of areas of measurement. So we looked at strength, endurance, flexibility, using the tests listed there. We did some anthropometry, so that's how heavy you are, how tall you are, looking at different measurements around, and we also used some bioimpedance. In terms of looking at people's sort of functional scales, we initially used 2 things, something called the FIM-FAM and the FAHI, which some of you will know, but you can ask me about later. We actually stopped using those because they weren't sensitive to what we were doing, and we started to use our own in-house functional screen, which I'll show you in a second. And in terms of goal setting, we just used a very simple 4-point, did you manage to achieve what you needed to do? Did you partly manage to achieve your goals? Did you not achieve them, or did they become not relevant? And then we would use other assessments as relevant as well. This is our 10-point scale, and so we looked at the sorts of things that would start to stimulate a conversation with patients about what is it that you want to do. So we're looking at tiredness, feeling weak, difficulty concentrating, difficulty remembering things, difficulty walking long distances, difficulty with coordination, pain, sleep and appetite. And using this kind of a simple scale actually was quite a good way of the people being able to identify the things that they want to work on. Otherwise, people are just like, oh, I just want to work on fitness. And it's like, well, no, we need to translate that into something which is meaningful. So I want to be able to, twice a week, walk my child to school, 800 metres away. The program looked like this. We tended to have a warm-up, some cardiovascular time, so that's exercise, so sort of aerobic exercise, some resistance, and then in the middle of the group, people would work on their individualised programs, whether that was around something around their hand function, so strength and coordination, whether it was around attention, recall, processing, whether it's balance and coordination, and we tried to incorporate quite a lot of fun into the group. So we had a Wii Fit, we had giant Connect 4, we got a little pool table, quite a lot of fun. And then we had some functional tasks. So you can see this is me here, a little bit younger, possibly a little thinner, where we had some shopping tasks that we could adapt to work on, so people could work on those specific functional skills. And then we usually finished with either progressive neuromuscular relaxation, or some imagery relaxation, or some warm down stretches. So a quick look at the data. So we've selected 70 sets of attendance data. So these people that attended of some period, all outpatients. So I didn't include any of the inpatients who just came down from the ward, because we didn't use the same types of outcome measures. We would use whatever program that we had for them on the ward. So there's sort of a different way of thinking. And we coded them for looking at diagnosis, presenting complaint, goal areas, whether they completed, reasons for non-completion, and any barriers to attendance. So just quickly looking at the demographics, you'll see that the graph on the right is our general population in the clinic, and on the left is our attenders. And you'll see that women are really overrepresented in this sample. And unsurprisingly, also Black African people were overrepresented. And actually, quite often, the vast majority or all of our group would be Black African ladies. Primarily because these are the people that presented us with more comorbidities and more issues that they needed to work on. And probably more barriers of accessing general services as well. Our age range was reasonably representative of what we saw generally in the clinic. In terms of the sorts of primary diagnosis that people were given, it's quite a range. You'll see that the largest single thing there is a peripheral neuropathy, which a lot of people did identify. Probably if we did some sub-analysis more in the earlier years than in the later years. But you can see there's quite a few central nervous systems things there. So TB in your brain, other HIV space-occupying lesions. But there is also lipodystrophy, there's some musculoskeletal things, there's some respiratory things, and there's some people who really just had multi-system advanced HIV. So quite a range of reasons, the diagnoses. In terms of when we sat down with people and went through, well, what are the things that you think are problems for you? Again, quite a range. You'll see that 50 of our 70 sets of people had some kind of weakness or problems with fitness. You'll see that body shape is really high up there. So a lot of our women came to us with body shape issues, and low body weight for quite a few people as well. Pain features for quite a lot of people, as does balance and coordination, mobility, and actually still reasonably high around memory and memory impairment as well. Translating that into the goals that people set, unsurprisingly, these are similar to the things that people presented to us with. So a lot of people wanted to work on their general fitness or activity tolerance, but lots of people also wanted to work on memory, wanted to work on upper limb function. And you can see that towards the end, some of the more actual functional things. So people who wanted to go back to work, who wanted to be able to look after their kids, who wanted to be able to do their sort of everyday tasks. This is the interesting part, I think, here. This is looking at why people did or didn't complete. So actually only just over half of all the people, or the sets of data I looked at, would we consider that people completed. And we sort of define completed as either achieving the goals that they wanted to achieve, or finishing kind of the sort of around about 20 sessions and then moving on to another appropriate service where they would continue to meet their goals. And you can see that of the 33 people that didn't complete, that nearly 3/4 of those, the main reason that they gave was that they had ill health or episodic health problems. And I think that's really important to know in our populations, that in these people that are presenting with the biggest comorbidities, that managing their episodic health is one of the biggest barriers. In terms of patterns of attendance, you'll see that only around about half of all people manage to achieve what we would call a continuous pattern. Sporadic are people who would come disengage with not really a clear pattern. And intermittent is someone that came, had a health problem, and then came back again. This second graph here is around the number of people that identified barriers to attendance, and this includes the people who completed. So out of all 70 sets, 3/4 of them identified some kind of barrier that made it difficult for them to adhere to coming. And you can see, unsurprisingly, for a large number of people, that was around illness. But I think, interestingly, there's a reasonable number here where a mood aspect, so just feeling too depressed to come, or having some kind of life event. Social or financial barriers, so around immigration status or travel, or chaotic lifestyle around drug and alcohol were also significant barriers. Subjectively, one of the things that we did see, we really underestimated the fact that people were the amount of peer support that they got, and particularly for inpatients from the outpatients, but even within, and anecdotally we saw people make relationships, give each other lifts, make friends outside of the group and carry that on. It led to sort of interrelationships between, say, people who were attending women's organisations and men's organisations. So I think that was something which I'd really like to be able to capture subjectively if we were looking at this again. And I think in terms of what we learned from this is that we know that when we set up programs that they need flexibility, that we need to look at, can we solve the barriers to access? But there are lots of barriers we probably can't solve, and in those cases it's about making sure that the programs that we actually design are flexible and allow for flexible patterns of attendance and flexible around ill health. And I think the other thing that's a problem for us is that the current tools, or the tools we were using at the time, didn't capture the episodic nature of HIV. So this is before we had perhaps the HDQ or something along those lines that we could employ if we were doing that now. And I think the other thing which is really key is making sure that effective goals are real life and achievable and meaningful. And I think there will be a really nice piece if we looked at this data in more detail around looking at the quality of goals that were set and achievement. And I would probably suggest, anecdotally, from that as we got better at setting goals with people that were real life, the things that they really pushed their buttons that they wanted to do, that actually probably their attendance improved. So I think there's something there that certainly would be a nice piece of research to do as well. So these are the sorts of things we want to have a look at. What happened to people after they graduated to a class? I think having a looking at those ideas of when the goals that they attained and what that actually means. I think having a look to see whether goal achievement was related to the impairment level, so all the other tests that we did, see if that was related. And I wonder whether actually sometimes people who subjectively felt they got a lot out of the group, we know objectively often their measurements didn't change. They didn't necessarily lose much weight, they didn't necessarily sort of change inches around their waist, but actually they felt better, and they felt better in their clothes, and they felt better about themselves, and they felt that they could go on with other programs. I think it would be interesting to have a look, like I said, at whether people completed and how the quality of our goals, and I think looking at, like I said, the goal data versus the impairment data. Just in terms of acknowledgements, want to acknowledge Emma, whose idea it was to start this group off when we started doing some meeting with some very underweight inpatients, and it sort of snowballed from there. And Kirsty, who is the other physio who I used to work with, who many of you also met.